During the 1950s close to the Californian desert, there's an organization town called Triumph, where blissful families carry on with wonderful lives. Each day the spouses go to work at Triumph Central Command outside town, and the housewife stays behind dealing with the house and rehearsing expressive dance under their instructor Shelley. The spouses aren't permitted to pose any inquiries about their husband's work, and visiting the base camp is taboo to them. One of these numerous cheerful couples is Alice and Jack, who have an exceptionally dynamic cozy life and love tossing parties for their neighbors, particularly Alice's dearest companion Rabbit and her significant other. The couple likewise has a main tune that Alice likes to murmur while she's tackling her errands. Once in a while the entire town shakes for a couple of moments, and Alice attempts to inquire as to whether it has a say in Triumph's tasks. Yet he will not reply, and Alice is fine with dropping the subject rapidly. One evening after artful dance, Rabbit and Alice watch a gathering of men in red jumpsuits assist the new neighbor with moving, while at the same time blabbering about the reality their companion Margaret didn't go to class. Which isn't shocking in light of the fact that Margaret has turned into the town's pariah after a strange occurrence. Afterward, Alice is in her nursery when she out of nowhere sees Margaret remaining in her terrace with a toy plane in her grasp, and her eyes shut on the grounds that evidently she's having an unusual vision of a couple of eyes opened in obscurity. Alice doesn't have the foggiest idea what to think about her and disregards it. While eating prepared, Alice finds every one of the eggs in her container are peculiarly unfilled, yet she overlooks them when her supper starts to consume in the stove. Occasionally later, Alice is going to a pool party at Shelley's home and murmuring her melody when Rabbit requests that she stop since she's burnt out on hearing it. Alice acknowledges then that she doesn't have the foggiest idea what tune it is, yet it's forever been latched onto her subconscious mind. Yet again as the tune plays in her mind, bizarre pictures show up before Alice's eyes. Yet she overlooks them when Rabbit diverts her. The party is stopped briefly by Shelley and her better half plane, the Triumph president, to offer a discourse to invite the new neighbors into town. The discourse is unexpectedly hindered by Margaret, who asks for what reason they're here when they shouldn't be. Her better half removes her, yet presently the temperament has become off-kilter. So Honest assumes control over the discussion to remind everybody that they're here, since they're influencing the world by building a little town in view of well-being and request. Thereafter, Alice is actually stressed over Margaret and goes searching for her, just to find her in her home being given a medication by her better half of some kind or another. Margaret attempts to let Alice know that she isn't fine, that she's had awful dreams, and that they're concealing her there. However, her better half finishes the way to keep Alice off of it. Alice gets back to the party and finds Jack in Blunt's room fixing his tie. To her shock, Jack begins getting lively with her in that general area. Things unexpectedly get strange again when Blunt appears and starts watching them in an extremely unusual manner. However, soon he leaves without saying a word, and Alice never educates Jack. The following day, Alice and her companions are doing some shopping when the subject of Margaret comes up. They remark on how she's acting strangely since the mishap. Yet Rabbit cuts in and reminds them it was anything but a mishap. Margaret defied the main norm they had and brought her kid profound into the desert, since she saw something, likely a fantasy. At the point when they viewed as her, she was separated from everyone else with her child's toy plane, and they never tracked down the youngster, in spite of the fact that Margaret swears they removed him from her as discipline. Once more, the discussion's abruptly hindered when the ground shakes. However, the ladies don't respond in light of the fact that they're utilized to it. One of them contemplates whether the bits of gossip about the men creating weapons are valid, yet an irate Rabbit removes her, reminding her the spouse's just mission is to help their husbands, and not to seek clarification on some pressing issues. Later around evening time, Alice starts having very odd dreams, and she can't quit contemplating them the following day. She concludes she really wants some natural air and takes the streetcar. However, rather than getting off at the shopping center, she stays so she can partake in the perspective on the desert, which the driver sees as beautiful. Strange. Unexpectedly, a plane that seems as though Margaret's toy shows up overhead, tumbling down until it crashes in the desert. There never was a plane hovering over this area previously, and Alice needs to look at it, particularly since they might require help. Yet the transport driver won't take her there since it conflicts with the guidelines. Alice disrupts the guidelines in any case, and strolls profound into the desert until she, in the long run, goes over a slope with a winding street encompassing it. She puts forth the additional attempt to go as far as possible up, until she finds a baffling vault, and starts calling for help, yet no one responds. Alice is frightened, yet she actually needs replies, so she gradually moves toward the arch, until she at long last thinks for even a second to put her hands on the glass walls. This development unexpectedly shakes her body, and makes her toss her head back as a progression of odd upsetting pictures show up in her eyes, and Blunt's voice keeps on looking at abandoning disarray. At the point when Alice at last will squint in the future, she ends up on her bed at home. Confounded and terrified, Alice goes to the kitchen, where she finds Jack attempting to cook, since he would have rather not awakened her. It turns out Alice had proactively returned when Jack got back home, yet she can't recollect how. She makes reference to the plane accident, just to hear Jack say there hasn't been any accident, Any other way everybody around would discuss it. Alice blows up and faults everything on terrible dreams, and Jack occupies her with some ameliorating contacts and kids about cooking. The following day, Alice is cleaning the windows as expected when abruptly, the wall behind her starts moving and squeezes her against the glass. Alice is scared as she attempts to push back, and just with a squint, the wall is back in its place since it was just a mental trip. At that point, the telephone rings and Alice gets it to hear Margaret inquire as to whether she saw it. She brings up their deceiving them and that they ought to leave, yet Alice can't take it and reminds her companion she isn't insane prior to hanging up. The discussion won't leave Alice's psyche however, and during her next artful dance class, she's stunned to see her appearance has become Margaret. At first Margaret duplicates everything Alice might do, yet abruptly she puts her hands on the glass and starts hitting her head, making Alice shout in alarm. No other person in the room understands what she's responding to, and when Alice pivots, Margaret is gone. Stressed over the importance behind this, Alice surges back home and finds Margaret remaining on top of her home. Alice shouts at her in tears, attempting to make her stop. However, Margaret overlooks her and finishes things. Once more, Alice overreacts and attempts to arrive at Margaret. However, she can scarcely make 2 strides before the men dressed in red seem to drag her away. At night, Alice attempts to let Jack know what occurred, yet Jack doesn't accept her on the grounds that Margaret's significant other is with her at the medical clinic and has told everybody she's fine. It was only a mishap while she was cleaning the windows. Alice despises that she's being treated as though she's insane and requests to know reality, getting some information about his work and what the organization is stowing away from everybody until he at last snaps. He hollers at her to remind her responding to those questions could mean losing their superb coexistence and requests that she drop the subject prior to abandoning her for the evening. Alice is upset to return to rest, consequently she attempts to occupy herself by observing some television. This triggers another fantasy where she ends up suffocating in a pool. It feels basically the same as the manner in which the wall caught her. However, before she can get a handle on the significance, she squints and ends up remaining against the window, as though she had attempted to leave. The following morning, Alice is wrapping the supper extras and doesn't actually have a decent hold of herself when her hands continue all alone and wrap part of her body. Alice wakes up following a couple of moments and eliminates the wrap, taking a full breath as she at long last acknowledges she's terrible at. Minutes after the fact, Jack brings Dr. Collins to do an examination. The specialist concludes this should be pressure brought about by the shock of seeing Margaret fall. And when Alice attempts to make sense of what truly occurred, Collins says the brain can once in a while change reality, since it's overpowered with melancholy. He additionally attempts to endorse some medication, yet both Jack and Alice won't take it, promising she doesn't require it. At that point, Alice sees Collins has arranged documents about Margaret in his satchel, provoking her to ask what has been going on with her. Collins makes sense of Margaret experienced eruptions and neurosis, which didn't permit her significant other to take care of his business in harmony. So he was terminated from Triumph, and Margaret was sent elsewhere to get the assistance she wants. A while later, Collins goes out and incidentally fails to remember his folder case. When he and Jack are out, Alice bounces on the portfolio to search for pieces of information. However, she's interfered with by Collins returning when he understands what he neglected. Alice imagines she had gotten the portfolio to hand it to him, and fortunately her demonstration is accepted. When the Collins has left for good, it's uncovered Alice got to take Margaret's records. However, every one of the pages have been passed out. Since the records are pointless, Margaret consumes them in the chimney while pondering Margaret and drinking bourbon to quietness the responsibility. She's actually drinking minutes some other time while she's washing up, and her brain begins to float, making her see that multitude of upsetting pictures once more. Albeit this time she can likewise see the sweet snapshots of a couple holding one another. She unexpectedly wakes up when Jack returns home and plays some music, and keeping in mind that Alice is still in shock, Jack comes to see her to ask out of the blue, assuming that they ought to have a child. Alice vows to consider it. Later at night, both of them go to an extravagant party coordinated at an eatery by Forthcoming, who won't quit watching her while examining things with Collins in a corner. This puts Alice on the edge, and she starts to fall into a breakdown when an artist shows up in the space to offer a show that helps Alice to remember her dreams. As tears fall, Alice requests that Jack bring her back home. However, Jack disregards her since Honest's going on the stage to make a major declaration. Shockingly, Blunt calls Jack to go along with him and reports he's getting an advancement. Everybody starts celebrating, yet this is the straw that broke the camel's back. That drives Alice into a full breakdown, and she rushes to the restroom, where she sees the vision of the couple once more. Rabbit unexpectedly makes an appearance to beware of her, and Alice attempts to make sense of everything. Except Rabbit stops her, chastening her for defying the guidelines. She believes Alice is acting like a youngster and attempting to destroy her significant other's huge evening. so she wants to get herself together and be a decent spouse. Alice must choose the option to return to their daily practice and attempt to disregard everything. A couple of days after the fact, Jack sorts out an evening gathering at his home, which forthcoming and Shelley likewise join in. While Alice is in the middle of cooking, straight to the point ways to deal with tell her she captivates him. He's constantly believed somebody should challenge him since extraordinary men can change history assuming they're pushed, so he trusts that Alice will keep on pushing from now on. During supper, Alice chooses to find a seat at the top of the table as opposed to allowing Jack to have the spot, since she needs to gaze straight toward Forthright while they eat. Whenever the typical talk starts, Alice interferes with it to get some information about their lives prior to arriving at this town and brings up how a similar few histories rehash among every one of the neighbors. They're told to recall these accounts since they maintain that they should fail to remember the genuine ones, similar to what has been going on with Margaret. Jack attempts to make Alice stop, yet Plain requests that she continue onward, inciting Alice to go on a tirade about all that she saw and how Blunt is deceiving everybody to make his ideal minimal world. Honest keeps his face impartial and tells everybody Alice is experiencing the very psychosis that Margaret did in any event, blaming her for having been in his room. Everybody is feeling very awkward, and Shelley snaps, calling Alice out for causing a ruckus and offending her better half, before she stands up and leaves. The wide range of various visitors follow her out, and keeping in mind that Jack goes to open the entryway, straightforward stays to tell Alice he hoped for something else from her before he leaves too. Alice is left incensed, and she snaps again when Jack returns and blames her for attempting to undermine his huge evening. She quickly comes to him to swear that wasn't true. Jack is more critical to her than this life and triumph, and they need to leave this spot before it annihilates their relationship. In the wake of hearing loads of asking, Jack at last surrenders and acknowledges to take off together. Alice burns through no time and hurries to pack the negligible necessities prior to joining Jack in the vehicle, who stuns her when he unexpectedly apologizes. Alice doesn't have the foggiest idea what's happening until the men in red make an appearance to drag her away, and Jack starts crying while he hears his better half sweeps for help. Alice is taken to the emergency clinic to get electroshock treatment. While her entire body harms, she begins seeing those dreams of the couple once more and finds it's her and Jack living in current times and murmuring that irritating tune. This Jack has lost his employment. However, Alice says it's alright on the grounds that she can take one more shift at the emergency clinic, where she fills in as a specialist. Taking twofold moves starts negatively affecting this Alice, and when she shows up later than expected, Jack doesn't help her state of mind by neglecting to make supper and having the nerve to get insulted when Alice is excessively drained to get going with him. Eventually, Jack goes through his late evening standing by listening to Plain's digital recording, advancing away from men to find their actual selves, away from the general public that covers them. In a little while, Alice awakens again in the medical clinic in Triumph. Collins reports she's been fixed, so Alice is sent back to town, where she starts residing her old routine again, as though nothing had occurred. Days pass serenely until one night, Jack comes from work singing that irritating melody once more. Beats then, at that point, uncovered that the Jack from her dreams is genuine, and he's applied to be important for the Triumph project, where he can decide to have the ideal life. This has conceded him admittance to a unique machine that he keeps at home, and Alice is associated with it every minute of every day, since her life in Triumph is each of the reenactment. This is no different for every one of the spouses there, and like different men, Jack associates himself to it consistently for a couple of hours, and he detaches when he enters the base camp in the desert. The remainder of the time, he is responsible for keeping Alice's genuine body well, and needs to work at a low task to pay for the machine. Back in Triumph, Alice tumbles to the floor in torment, overpowered by the pictures that just hit her brain. She requests a clarification from Jack, who promptly gets cautious, and shouts that he made it happen, so they could have an ideal life, since they had been hopeless. Alice actually trusts he's acted like a cunt for taking her independence and attempting to persuade her she's insane. She's likewise stressed over different spouses and the children, yet Jack promptly explains the children aren't genuine, they're important for the recreation also. Then Jack tumbles to his knees to ask for absolution as he sticks to Alice, making it difficult for her to relax. Burnt out on her better half's falsehoods, Alice snatches a glass and uses it to hit Jack to take him out. What she can be sure of is that withering in Triumph likewise kills you, in actuality, and as the genuine Jack shuts his eyes, forthcoming gets a call letting him know what occurred. At that point, Rabbit goes into the house since she's heard a few commotions and quickly covers Jack's body, prior to attempting to quiet Alice down. Alice attempts to make sense of everything, and Rabbit admits she definitely knows she picked the recreation, since it's the main way she can have her children back after they passed on, in actuality. She additionally makes sense of Alice needs to go to the base camp and detach herself, since Jack can't do it for her in the genuine machine any longer. Alice is apprehensive yet does as Rabbit asks, finding every one of the neighbors are emerging too. As all the street lamps start detonating, The ladies are begun to see something is off, however the men are focusing on getting some information about Jack and attempting to stop Alice. Rabbit emerges to push the men off, allowing Alice the opportunity to move in a vehicle and drive away in the nick of time before the men dressed in red show up, taking vehicles to pursue her. A pursuit starts through the roads, and keeping in mind that Alice figures out how to leave town with no difficulty, things get more convoluted in the desert. When the men in red start to hit her vehicle with theirs, Dr. Collins is additionally coming in his own vehicle and advances rapidly to help getting her. However, when Alice regards herself as encircled, she rapidly moves the vehicle far removed and makes Collins and the others run into one another. Straightforward gets the insight about Collins' demise at home with the approach speaker, so Shelley hears what's happening as well. While Straightforward's bustling providing orders, Shelley approaches him and cuts him, asserting it's her turn now. In the desert, Alice keeps driving until she tracks down the slope and takes the street with the vehicle. However, the vehicle stalls out on a terrible turn. Still not prepared to surrender, Alice leaps out of the vehicle and starts running, thinking the vehicle hindering the way is sufficient to stop the others. Sadly, the men in red leave their vehicles as well and begin climbing the slope to attempt to find her, so Alice needs to push her body to the super to run as far as possible up. At the point when she arrives at the vault, Alice fantasizes Jack embracing her and requesting that she stay. She additionally recollects their time together in actuality. At that point, the men dressed in red show up behind her, which helps her to remember what she needs to do. Alice rushes to the wall and puts her hands on the glass, tossing her head back as the upsetting pictures return to her, blended in with certain recollections of the genuine her. Abruptly everything goes dark and Alice pants.